Hello, hello. This is Gabriel Fairman, and today I'm going to talk to you about how to future-proof your translation agency. And first of all, that sounds beautiful, and it's a lot harder to do than it seems, right? Just running a translation agency in and of itself is a grueling, very complex task. So hats off to everybody out there who's running or being a part of a translation agency. I think most people who are outside the translation and localization industry have a hard time imagining just how hard, how complex, how grueling it is to be a part of a language organization, right? The work is super highly commoditized. It's very underappreciated. It's very complex. And essentially you get the word falling on you for all of your mistakes when things go wrong. And when things go right, you basically did nothing else other than your job. It's super competitive. It's very hard to stand out. There are dozens of thousands of translation agencies spread around the world. All of them claim that they're better, faster, and cheaper than each other. It's really a dogfight. It's very hard. Clients always want things sooner, better, cheaper. Translators need to make a living. Agencies are squished between this, trying to make everybody kind of happy, or at least least unhappy as possible. It's very hard, right? It's very hard. And the economic pressures, they only get greater. If you take a look at the average per word rate charged over the past 15 to 20 years, they haven't been getting any higher, while costs of living have been getting higher. So overall, compared to cost of living, it's fair to say that the average per word rate has diminished. And it's only going to get harder. I don't think it's going to get any easier due to the advent of technology. At least that hasn't been the case in the past decade or two. So now let's just quickly talk about business strategies. And that's not really what this video is about, but I do want to just go over a few different business strategies that your translation agency may or may not have. So the first is whether you're a niched agency or a generalized agency. And each of these has some pros and cons. If you're a niched agency, let's say for instance, you only focus on life sciences, or you only focus on marketing, or you only focus on a certain TMS or on a certain tech provider, that gives you an edge in the sense that things become more predictable, easier to manage. It's a little bit harder to grow because it's harder. You can only find clients within a very specific space, a little bit easier to manage quality, and it's a lot stickier, right? Once you have that level of authority in a niche, that typically means it's going to be harder to get knocked down. So those are the pros and the cons of being in a niche. Now, from the opposite of being in a niche is being more generalized. The benefit of being generalized is that it's easier to grow because you can take on any kind of opportunity that comes your way. You can work, for instance, for pharma companies, marketing agencies, insurance companies. You can take on translation jobs versus interpreting jobs, DTP versus file engineering. So you have that ease of taking things as they come. The challenge is that that's a lot harder to manage, and it's less sticky because you're going to face more niched competition in each one of these areas, right? So that's the first differentiation if you're going to go niche or if you're going to go general. Now, the second big differentiator, I think, for language agencies is whether you're going to focus more on end clients or more on translation agencies as your buyer. End clients have the benefit that they're willing to pay more. They're typically going to be more flexible in their processes and their tooling. So again, there's no real solution here or there, but these are ways to differentiate your strategy. And last but not least, a major differentiator is whether you're focusing more on cost or more on quality as your strategy, right? If you focus more on cost, in theory, it's easier to grow because your product is more accessible. It's harder to maintain quality because you have less of a budget to work with, so you can typically hire less qualified people. A lot harder to attain your margins as well because you're working with a smaller top line. Now, if you focus on quality, it becomes easier to hire more talented, more expensive people in principle. It becomes easier to attain your margins because you're working with a bigger top line. But I'm not here to discuss strategy. That's not what this video is about. Really, what we're talking about is how to future-proof your agency. So what are the characteristics, the traits that are invariable regardless of your agency strategy, regardless of your niched or generalized approach of working with large translation agencies or direct to your own end clients, focusing on quality or on cost, regardless of what your strategy is and the combination of these permutations. There are certain elements that will guarantee that you have an increased likelihood of survival over the next 10 to 20 years rather than a decreased. likelihood of survival. And the first one is what I would say is the underpinning of the remaining three. It's probably the most important and the hardest, in my opinion, which is a software-first strategy. This is super hard because what that means is software is architected over rules. Processes don't require necessarily rules or very little universal rules. You can have all kinds of exceptions baked into a process. You can have one process for one situation, another process for another situation. I mean, you can run an agency with literally hundreds of different processes for different kinds of scenarios. In a software, you can't build software like that. Software, by architectural limitation, requires a greater universality of use case. So basically, you have less flexibility from a process perspective, but that decreased flexibility also gives you a lot more efficiency from a business perspective. So that means more rules, fewer exceptions. Well, what does this mean in practice, right? Let's talk about an agency that has two clients. One client says, I need my files to be done exclusively in Microsoft Word, and I need them to be verified using this specific tool in this specific way, and I need them to be delivered to me in this FTP server in this certain way. All right, that's fine. That's a client requirement, and why not abide to it, right? But if you have 100 clients, for instance, and each of these have different requirements, it's going to be very hard to find then a software that's going to be able to comply to each and every one of these requirements, which means you're going to have to require human beings to manage each and every one of these exceptions, which means it's going to be a very inefficient process from an operational perspective. So the challenge with having a software first approach is that it requires working with clients very deeply, very closely, asking questions. And in this scenario, for instance, asking why do you need this file updated in an FTP folder? Would we be able to, for instance, use our webhooks and our REST APIs to deliver the files once the file is ready directly to a repository? Would you be willing, for instance, to have someone on your team access the files in our translation platform once they are ready if we're willing to give you a 5% discount on the overall work? So, and I mentioned this because typically every process has a business implication. And while clients have infinite lists of requirements and ideas that are very specific to their businesses, each and every one of these ultimately boils down to cost. And if you're able to translate these costs into benefits for your clients, it's very likely that you'll be able to attain some level of flexibility in how they see the process. So a software-first approach is a very deep paradigm change because it starts first and foremost with what the software that you have or the software stack that you have is capable of doing, working based on that, rather than trying to make the software stack fit your given processes and situations. And while there is some loss involved in this transformation, not everybody may be happy in conforming to the limitations of the software. And again, there are also huge benefits in that as well, but there are some limitations and it's important to recognize that. Working with a software first approach, that's going to unlock the possibility of automation. It's going to unlock the possibility of true augmented translations and true continuous improvement. In my opinion, those are the real underpinnings of future-proofing your translation agency. So let's suppose you're able to slowly take a software-first approach. And again, this is a journey. This isn't a switch, right? You probably have tens, if not hundreds, maybe even thousands of different clients. Each of them has their own story with you. Each of them has their own legacy. So that's number one. Number two is what this enables in terms of automation, right? As the economic pressures mount over the translation industry, and they will continue to mount because ultimately the market wants faster, cheaper, and better translations. That's just what the client wants, what the invisible hand, what Adam Smith's invisible hand is moving towards, right? And in order to do that, you can only do that with technology, right? If you compare what I'm able to do versus whatever my shadow self is able to do with tech, my shadow self will beat me 100% of the times. For instance, if I'm quoting by hand and I'm opening a file and I'm uploading it into a translation management system and I'm creating a log file and I'm importing a log file into another business management system and then I'm using that log file to then create line items for my clients, think about the difference in business efficiency, right? Over time, which business is more likely to succeed? The business that's giving their clients quotes that are essentially in runtime, automated, predictable, super easy, or the agency that's requiring 10-15 minutes to get back to the quote. And also remembering that each of these quotes is taking 10 to 15 minutes of human hours to prepare. So they have a huge cost as well. So my shadow self is preparing these quotes on fractions of a penny, whereas me working with technology, but that's non-automated, that's having a very high cost, a very low operational efficiency. By working in that way, I'm a lot less likely to be future-proofed than by working with automation. This same level of automation that extends and ripples through the entire workflow of a translation agency. So I was talking about quoting. The next step, once the project is approved, task placement. Again, think about the comparison, right? Think about an agency that has a project manager that's emailing linguists or mass alerting linguists saying that a job is available, waiting for a linguist to get back or waiting for many linguists to get back to then decide on who should take the job and making concessions because one person would like to do the job but they need an extra day and the other person cannot do the job, but that's taking a ton of mental bandwidth. That's going to consume a lot of hours and it's going to take more time from the quote approval to the project start. Now compare this to this automated scenario where the quote gets approved by a client. It could be 2 a.m. for instance, where the quote gets approved, could be a different time zone entirely. And as soon as you get the approval based on a set of business rules, including quality scores, profitability guidelines, availability, tagging. So you essentially create these parameters so a translator, only who's eligible to get that job based on the criteria that you define, gets alerted exactly as the job gets available to take that. In the other case, you have very little human intervention. And the key thing is that what automation enables is that it allows the same people in your organization to focus on a lot more higher value-added tasks. Now you can focus that same bandwidth on building a relationship with an existing client, maybe focusing on developing a new client, on creating a new solution, instead of focusing effort in deciding who should take a given task. So all of this automation, it enables huge business gains because you can now shift your same people into more higher value added tasks. And that's going to increase the probability of your business surviving increased competition in the years to come. Now, the third scenario, which is absolutely key, maybe the most important of them all, is the augmented translations bit. So now in a world that's post-GPT, full on adopting generative AI at its own pace, it's already possible to create translations at least twice as fast than it was before in a machine translation plus translation memory plus glossary paradigm. But the fact is right now, I'm able to produce at least twice as fast as I was able to produce a year ago. And if my previous self were to compete with my current self, it would be out of business because my current self working at twice as speed, at twice as fast, could probably quote maybe with 40% less and still be happier than my previous self. So if we don't implement augmented translations in a fair, respectful, mindful way, we become obsolete from a cost perspective. Pretty soon our translations are going to be expensive. Clients are going to be comparing us to options that are going to be way, way, way less expensive. And obviously, if multiple people are offering the same thing that you're offering at significantly lower rates, eventually your work is going to come into question. And this is maybe the crux of future-proofing, which is not waiting for that day to come. Because if you're waiting for client loss to make a move, it's already too late. So again, just covering the key things, right? First, a software-first strategy and everything else that unlocks. Automation and augmented translations. Those are key business drivers. They will allow you to operate much more effectively, much more aggressively, much more efficiently, and ultimately competitively than compared to a company that doesn't have these things really well implemented. And last but not least is having true continuous improvement. Because when you're working in a software-first strategy with real automation and augmented translations, that enables a data-first approach to management. So you'll be able to know who the best are, whether you're best project managers, whether you're best translators, whether you're best clients. And working in a data paradigm, it allows you to not just, for instance, place a job to a given translator because they performed well in a test 2 or 3 years ago, or because they're super nice to your project managers, but really because they are consistently performing well at every single job, and you're being able to pull for quality at every single step, and not just, for instance, in random LQAs performed once in a while, or whenever you get bad feedback from a given client. So this continuous improvement framework, it's super important because in this post-generative AI society, It's been proven in several research papers that medium to mediocre performance can be fairly easily replaced by large language models, and if not now, by GPT-4, in some point by GPT-5, and if not by GPT-5, by GPT-6. That is definitely the direction in which we're going. I still believe that there's huge room for human ingenuity, for human creativity, for human critical ability, but it's those people who possess those faculties and who are truly exercising them that will make the biggest difference. So working with this true continuous improvement framework will enable you to really focus on excellence, to deliver excellence, and to know that you're always going towards excellence. But if anything, if from this video I can deliver a single important message to you, it is be willing to change before it's necessary. Because if there's one trait that I see pervasively spread across our space, is a certain denial or resistance that change is coming. And I understand that based on the past, a lot of people expected a huge tsunami out of machine translation and nothing really changed that significantly. And I know that I can be just a quiet dissenting voice saying that this time is different, but this time it is different because technology is finally catching up to us. It's not just generative AI. It's much deeper than that. It's an economic pressure that has been mounting over the past decades over the industry that the industry has been able to fight off very successfully by adding an incredible layer of servicing and account managing and adaptability. But that's no longer going to be enough. Every single layer of a language agency, of a language organization, is going to be held to utmost standards of excellence when it comes to operational efficiency. And if you don't start down that path right now, when the pressures do amount to an insurmountable situation, it'll be very hard to play catch up. So again, this is not to alarm you, but the way to future-proof your business is by beginning right now. Thank you so much for your time. Please remember to subscribe if you like this video, leave your comments below, and talk to you soon.